Greetings of peace, everyone. This is Bassem Shaban, Executive Director of the Peace Institute, and we are here once again with our new show, Race in America, discussing social issues about race from two different faith perspectives that are very similar but also somewhat different at the same time. And we're discussing a very important topic related to race in our society in the United States. So as always, we have Rabbi David Kay representing the Jewish community and Imam Hatem Hamidullah representing the Muslim community and perspective. And today's show, we're going to be discussing a very controversial issue that's been really brewing for a few years. And obviously, anytime there's a political season, there's a lot of new issues and policies that come out in societal discussions. And one of them has been critical race theory. So today we're going to first define it as accurately as we can from accurate sources, and then get the perspectives of our distinguished speakers. So first and foremost, we'd like to show you this quick video that gives us somewhat of the level of controversy behind it and what critical race theory is, and then we'll have our speakers present their views. So here we go.
To hate others because of their skin color.
Critical race theory was once an obscure academic concept. Now, as students head back to school, it's a fixture in the fierce U.S. debate over how to teach children about the country's history and race relations. Conservatives have invoked the term to denounce curricula and policies they deem too liberal. This was supposed to be a routine school board meeting in Virginia. Instead, it was pandemonium, as hundreds of parents flooded the auditorium.
Critical race theory is anti-white, and it's not American.
Let's roll back the clock to unpack what's happening. Critical race theory, or CRT, is an approach to studying U.S. policies and institutions that is most often taught in law schools. Law professors in the 70s began exploring how race and racism have shaped American law and society. The theory rests on the premise that racial bias, intentional or not, is baked into U.S. laws and institutions. The term gained a foothold after the murder of George Floyd in May 2020. Individuals and institutions began grappling with how racism persists in modern-day American society. In September 2020, conservative journalist and researcher Christopher Rufo went on Fox News to decry the anti-bias training happening in federal agencies as an example of critical race theory. Shortly after, President Donald Trump's administration directed federal agencies to cease such training, calling it, quote, divisive, un-American propaganda.
Why did you decide to do that?
They were teaching people that our country is a horrible place, it's a racist place, and they were teaching people to hate our country. And I'm not going to allow that to happen.
Vice President Biden?
Nobody's doing that. He's the racist.
You just don't.
President Joe Biden has since overturned that executive order. In the year since Trump's executive order, conservative politicians, parents, and right-wing media have deployed the term to denounce discussions of racism, white privilege, or diversity initiatives in U.S. public schools. Remember that school being bombarded by parents in Virginia? Scenes like this happened across the country.
My youngest looks very white, so they would look at her and say, "You are an oppressor." I don't see how that's productive. I don't see how it's accurate, and I don't see how it's not going to cause society to move further apart.
Would you not teach what happened during World War I or World War II or the American Revolution? No, you wouldn't. We need critical race theory because we need real history.
At least 8 Republican-led states have passed legislation restricting how the concept of race can be taught. In Tennessee, a new law was passed in May that dictates lessons cannot make students feel, quote, discomfort, guilt, or anguish because of their race or sex. Public school districts across the U.S. in liberal and conservative counties alike have insisted that they do not teach the theory. Reuters spoke with 2 Tennessee teachers who say they and some of their colleagues are unsure how to teach accurately about slavery and other painful chapters of American history without violating the new law.
So, as you guys can see, the rhetoric behind critical race theory is very serious, and it's had a lot of political repercussions over the last few years and has divided the nation with all of the other elements of division that have taken place in the last few years related to COVID and so on. So today we want to hear from our faith leaders about what they think the situation is and how we can find maybe common ground, and then at the same time feel that we can reflect American history with its good, bad, and ugly in a way that we can move forward and find solutions for the future of the nation. So as always, we'll start with Rabbi David Kay. Welcome, Rabbi.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's an honor and a pleasure to be part of this very important work. As the video indicated, critical race theory is not a thing that gets taught in elementary or high schools. It's exactly what it says. It's a theory, a legal theory, and it's a way of examining not even necessarily history, but law and legislation, that history of legislation, in a way that we weren't really encouraged to do, at least when I was coming up through elementary and high school and college and beyond. So its origins are in those who were training to be attorneys and would eventually be judges and prosecutors and public defenders, and they wanted to have a clearer and better context for how the law has been operating and continues to operate. Saying that we have to consider how the law was structured over time and how it responded to race, whether consciously or subconsciously, is not an inherently judgmental thing. It doesn't make people hate America. It makes people pay attention to what's happening in their country, or what has happened in their country. Specifically from the Judaic perspective, this would be something that would be encouraged in a legal process, and certainly for those who are training in the law. We have a brief passage in the Torah that says "Tzedek, tzedek tirdof," which means justice, justice you will pursue. And in the rabbinic tradition, we have this idea that if a word is repeated, then it means something. It's not just emphasis, but there's a reason why a word is repeated, and the word justice is repeated according to several sources, and the best known source is probably Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who said the first justice is the noun, and the second justice is the adjective. In other words, if you don't pursue and achieve what appears to be justice by just means, it isn't justice at all. So just because you got the right outcome doesn't necessarily mean it's justice if the process by which you got there is not just. And likewise, if the process is unjust, then what appears to be the right outcome may be okay for the moment, but in the longer term, you are actually perpetuating injustice. A concept that says we need to look at how the law developed and how it's structured and how it's been applied in the past and how it's being applied now is entirely consistent with that understanding that justice has to be achieved by just means.
Thank you. Imam Hatem?
Yes, good afternoon, and I'm happy to be here as well. this is disheartening, to say the least, that there is some controversy among certain citizens that believe that this will disrupt basic and fundamental educational processes. And so I think that the whole idea about critical race theory would not exist if there was not a need for it. It's a need for that. And I think that the main problem here is people just kind of like calming down a little bit and looking at how the cake was baked, you know, because we keep hearing these concepts and based upon people's comments on this critical race theory, and it's kind of like what side of the fence a person is on. You know, is as the rabbi said, are they on the side of justice, or do they still, you know, hold certain biases based upon history? And I think that it is simply an educational process. And if people are truly educators, then the educator is supposed to look for the facts. And if educators and lawmakers and people that get things done in this country are not really actually looking for the facts, then my question is, what are you looking for? Or what are you looking to basically and fundamentally keep covered up? You know, so I think this is a good, healthy conversation that American citizens need to have. Those who are responsible for making laws, those who are responsible for educating our children, those who are responsible for making sure that the course of history is set right and set straight. You know, sometimes you have to back up to go forward. I mean, people who have driveways, you know, garages, you got to go and park your car, but you can't leave in the morning and just go forward. Sometimes you have to back up, and that's what we need to do with this historical, you know, situation that's existing in America. It's inevitable that you have to take a good, hard look at it if people are sincere about solving this problem with critical race theory.
Now, how much do you guys think this is driven based on political agendas, like a political football? Or do you think there is a divide in American society about CRT based on what's being taught in school or, you know, other agencies? So how much do you think politics is playing into this? Rabbi?
Well, here in Florida, it's been almost nothing but political. You know, it was brought forward from a particular ideology for a particular agenda. It was vilified. There was no public conversation. There was no open debate. There was no, you know, nothing of a process. It was just set forward saying this is bad, and we have to ban it. And so, you know, I would that it weren't politicized in that way, in the partisan way, so that we really could have that conversation. The other thing that's happened is those who are of an ideology who are saying, you know, from the first step that this is bad, this is, you know, this is evil, this is un-American. They've created their own definition. And part of what would right that ship, so to speak, would be somehow being able to take the definition back and restore it to what it really means. I think, not to continue too much with nautical metaphors, but I believe that ship has sailed. And we, you know, we can just hope that reasonable voices are raised enough to counteract, and we can eventually have a reasonable conversation. There was one thing in the video that I really wanted to react to, though, was the dad saying, you know, my child's going to be called an oppressor. In no way does actual critical race theory say, if you're white and you're alive in the 21st century, you are an oppressor. What it does say is, it's very clear from historical evidence that there were white people who were oppressors, and did run the slave trade years ago, and that the remnants of that structure in our society have not been completely removed. That's not telling little white kids to hate themselves. That's teaching history.
So, Imam, what do you think? How much weight is this political rhetoric playing out in the conversation?
I think that the velocity of these remnants that of biases that put this country together, made certain laws, and some described it as a slanted democracy, and so because politics is the forerunner for everything else in this country, unfortunately, because politics is in that position of leadership, then the individuals that are wanting to hold their positions among the citizenry of this country, if they see an opportunity, it as an advantage to push back on this idea of critical race theory to stay in office, then it has been it has been politicized heavily, I do believe, and simply, but I think also that it is like a two-pronged situation, maybe even three-pronged situation, where those individuals are perplexed when it comes to really educating our society. So who are they going to allow to educate the society if not the educators, that really want to go after those facts that we talked about? Or are they going to just bend to the political, it's not political savvy, it is political influences that weigh heavy on the citizenry of this country, and you have all of these little nooks and crannies, these little pockets of, these biases. And it's easy to see. I would just say that it's easy to see, the pockets of bias when you hear the rhetoric, when you start hearing like the individual that the rabbi referred to. It is a situation of not being properly educated in regards to real history. That's where I am with that.
So obviously, this has brought the same issue that we see a lot in society about justice. So what is your views from your religious perspectives about how does a society establish justice moving forward?
Well, I'll go back to the brief verse that I quoted. Pursuit by just means, and if the systems that are supposed to deliver justice are not themselves just, then it's an impossible task. It's always going to stay out of reach. I learned in my life, if I've learned anything, that this country that I was born in, that gave shelter to my father and my grandparents when they came from other countries, that it has a legal system that works pretty well a lot of the time. No system is going to be perfect, but we have to be careful in calling it a justice system, because that's not what it's predicated on. I mean, if you think about that system, it's an adversarial system, and the idea is that if I have my attorney and the other party has their attorney and their adversaries, that they're going to work as hard as they possibly can to win, because the reward is in the winning. That's coincident with justice probably a majority of the time, but there's no way that's going to be coincident with justice all the time, or even most of the time, because it's just going to be who's a better fighter, who can put together the better arguments. I don't have the expertise to say here's a better system, but what I do have is that that mandate from my tradition, which exists in so many other traditions, that our purpose for being here is to establish justice.
Exactly. Yeah, so I agree 100%. A just society means a society that is doing right by all of its people. A just society, from our perspective under God, we say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, highly glorified is He, or a just society in the path that God has laid out for us by His word, is a society doing justice based upon revelatory knowledge. And that's where the big quagmire takes place, you know. We can find common denominators in the language of Musa or Moses and Isa, or Jesus, and Muhammad, present peace be upon all of them. We can find the common denominators and the common thread for justice in the language of revelation, if we look hard enough. And I think that again, unfortunately, the way that our society is run, which is a pretty good society, but the way that it is run is that governmental language, whatever the latest perception on government policies are at the time, is what rules the day. And so that's the reason why I think that this conversation that we're having is so unique and so important, is because we want to put, connect the dots in the most proper way, especially from our religious perspectives. Now, so this whole idea about justice, then I have to bring it in a little bit more religion when it comes to language. God says in the Quran, "Inna wa'adallahi al-haq." Certainly the promise of God is true. So you ask yourself, what is the promise of God? And one of the major answers would be, it would be to bring justice in the world. Eventually bring justice in the world by His people, by His own hand, without the people. And this is the way that we believe. Inna wa'adallahi al-haq. Certainly the promise of God is true, and God is a just God. The term for just in Arabic for Allah is adl, al-adl. He is a just God. And it's kind of like very, very simple, but people make it very, very complicated. If I ask, what do you truly believe to be the truth? And then you'll get all of these different perceptions about what truth is and what justice is. And then you have a situation where you have a new definition for justice, or you have a new definition for the new truth, and that's perplexing. So we're in a situation where we need practical and fundamental thinkers, people who have the concern for everybody in their heart, as opposed to just their group. I think that this broad, in a sense, brush that covers every citizen in the United States of America and abroad, when it comes to justice, that's how we should look at this whole thing about critical race theory. Is everybody being treated fairly as we discuss these issues?
All right, thank you once again for your wisdom and thoughts and reflections. Obviously, this controversy is not going to go away anytime soon. It's still probably happening in institutions, academic and government and law all over the country. So we appreciate you guys adding your faith perspectives to the conversation. And we look forward to having more conversations like this to heal the wounds of the country and to find common ground and solutions moving forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you, viewers, for your attention, and we look forward to seeing you in a new episode. Take care.